Ladies and gentlemen, today we're diving into a story that's as gripping as it is heartbreaking. A story that Hollywood tried to keep under wraps for decades, but the truth, as it always does, has finally come to light. This is the story of Ross Martin, a man whose talent knew no bounds, whose life was a roller coaster of triumphs and tragedies, and whose final moments left a void in the hearts of those who knew him best. So sit back, because this isn't just a story. It's an emotional journey that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about one of television's greatest stars. Let's start at the end because sometimes the end tells us more about a person than their beginning. On July 3, 1981, Ross Martin, the beloved actor who brought Artemus Gordon to life in the Wild Wild West, collapsed on a tennis court in Ramona, California. It was a cruel twist of fate for a man who had fought so hard to prove his strength after surviving a near-fatal heart attack in 1968. His doctor had warned him. His wife, Olavi, had begged him to take it easy. But Ross Martin was not a man who backed down from a challenge. He had taken up tennis as a way to prove to himself and to the world that he was still strong, still capable. But on that fateful day, his determination outpaced his body's ability to keep up. Eyewitnesses say he felt dizzy during a game, staggered toward the clubhouse, and collapsed just a few feet from the entrance. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. His heart had flatlined. The official cause of death? A complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, a condition often referred to as the widowmaker. Ross Martin was 61 years old. But this isn't just a story about how Ross Martin died. It's about how he lived. It's about the incredible journey of a man who rose from humble beginnings to become one of Hollywood's most versatile and beloved actors. And it's about the dark truths that Hollywood kept hidden for far too long. Ross Martin was born Martin Rosenblatt on March 22, 1920, in Grodek, Poland. His family was part of the Polish Jewish community, a community that faced growing instability and anti-Semitism in the years following World War I. His father, Isaac Rosenblatt, worked as a tinsmith, while his mother, Sarah Lerner, took care of the household. Life was uncertain, and the Rosenblatt family knew they needed a fresh start. So when Ross was just an infant, they made the difficult decision to leave everything behind and immigrate to America. They boarded the steamship Nurella in Danzig on August 29, 1920, and after nearly 3 weeks at sea, they arrived at Ellis Island on September 18th. Immigration officials recorded his name as Marcus Rosenblatt, a small change that often happened during the documentation process. It was the first of many transformations in Ross Martin's life. The Rosenblatt family settled in the Bronx, a neighborhood filled with immigrants trying to build new lives. Growing up in this vibrant, multicultural environment, Ross became fluent in multiple languages before he even learned English. He spoke Polish, Yiddish, and Russian at home, and later picked up French, Spanish, and Italian. His talent for languages became one of his greatest strengths, helping him later in life as an actor. When he played Artemus Gordon in The Wild Wild West, he even used Russian in some scenes, adding a personal touch to his performances. Despite the challenges of being raised in a working-class immigrant family, Ross excelled in school. He attended City College of New York, a top school known for educating many first-generation students, and graduated magna cum laude. He then earned a law degree from George Washington University's National University School of Law. His future seemed set for a stable career in law or business, but Ross had other plans. Instead of becoming a lawyer, he chose acting, a decision that would change his life forever. In the 1940s, Ross teamed up with Bernie West to form a comedy duo called Ross and West. They performed in vaudeville and nightclubs across upstate New York, mixing fast-paced jokes with physical comedy. Crowds loved them, and their timing was sharp. Ross had a natural gift for making people laugh, and West later called him a comedic genius. But the duo didn't last long. Ross wanted to explore more opportunities in entertainment while West moved into writing and producing. Years later, West would work on sitcoms like All in the Family, but Ross had already moved on to bigger things. By 1953, Ross was on Broadway. His first major role came in Hazel Flag, a musical satire based on the 1937 film Nothing Sacred. He played Dr. Eaglehofer in a production that ran for 190 performances at the Mark Hellinger Theater. The show was a success, and Ross stood out for his stage presence and ability to balance humor with drama. Sharing the stage with actors like Helen Gallagher and Thomas Mitchell, he proved he was more than just a comedian. Broadway opened new doors for Ross, and soon he was making a name for himself in radio. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Ross became a well-known voice on radio programs like Cavalcade of America and Dimension X. He had an incredible ability to switch between accents and characters, which led to his own program, The Ross Martin Show. Each episode showcased his talent for playing multiple roles, sometimes shifting between voices so seamlessly that listeners didn't realize it was the same person. This versatility made him a sought-after voice actor and helped him transition into live television anthologies. Then Hollywood came calling. In 1955, Ross made his film debut in George Pal's Conquest of Space, a science fiction epic about humanity's first journey to Mars. He played Sergeant Andrei Fodor, a supporting character in a story filled with groundbreaking special effects and deep existential themes. The film wasn't a major hit, but it was an important step for Ross. Just a few years later, he appeared in another sci-fi thriller, The Colossus of New York, in 1958. His Hollywood career was gaining momentum, and this was just the beginning of a journey that would last nearly 3 decades. Ross Martin's big break came in 1959 when he played Andamo in Mr. Lucky, a CBS series created by Blake Edwards. Andamo was a quick-witted gunrunner and sidekick to John Vivian's smooth-talking gambler. The show was set on a floating casino, giving it a mix of adventure and danger. Ross's dry humor made Andamo stand out right away. In the pilot episode, his smuggling operation takes a bad turn when authorities find a hidden cache of weapons on Lucky's boat. His deadpan delivery, "We are in trouble. I am the one responsible for the gun smuggling," set the tone for his character's sharp wit. Off-screen, Ross put his own spin on the role. He improvised lines and even created his own disguises. In one episode, he dressed as a bartender to spy on mobsters. He also designed his own makeup, a skill that would later become a major part of his career. The show was praised for its style and humor, but it struggled with ratings and was canceled after 1 season. Even so, critics took notice. TV Guide called Ross's performance effortlessly charming and praised his ability to switch between accents and personalities. More importantly, Mr. Lucky introduced Ross to Blake Edwards, a director who would play a major role in his future success. 3 years later, Ross shocked audiences with his performance in Experiment in Terror, 1962. He played Garland Red Lynch, an asthmatic sociopath who terrorizes bank teller Kelly Sherwood, played by Lee Remick. It was a complete departure from the charismatic Andamo. Ross studied a childhood friend with asthma to perfect Lynch's eerie, labored breathing. He also insisted on doing his own stunts, including a brutal garage attack scene filmed in a single take. The result was terrifying. In one of the most chilling moments, Lynch forces Sherwood to listen over the phone as he strangles her co-worker. His breathing grows heavier with each second. Critics compared it to Anthony Perkins' performance as Norman Bates in Psycho. The New York Times called Lynch a masterclass in understated menace. Director David Lynch, who was no relation to Ross, later said the character inspired Twin Peaks killer Bob. The role earned Ross a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor, a rare honor for a villain in a thriller. He almost turned it down, afraid of being typecast. But it became one of the defining performances of his career. In The Great Race, 1965, Ross proved he could make a villain just as funny as he could make one terrifying. He played Baron Rolf von Stuppe, a scheming aristocrat trying to pull off a coup in the fictional kingdom of Carpania. The film, directed by Blake Edwards, starred Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, but Ross stole the spotlight every time he appeared. One of the movie's best scenes is a duel between his character and Curtis's hero, Leslie. With a smirk, the Baron taunts, "I prefer a man's weapon. How are you with a saber?" before launching into an elegant but ridiculous sword fight. Ross's comedic timing was perfect. He even improvised during the famous 10-minute pie fight, a chaotic scene that used over 4,000 pies. Later, he joked, "I've never been so deliciously humiliated." Critics loved him. Variety called his performance deliciously suave, and noted that he stole every scene without breaking a sweat. The film had a massive $12 million budget, the highest ever for a comedy at the time, and it cemented Ross as an actor who could hold his own with Hollywood's biggest stars. Between 1959 and 1965, Ross proved he could do it all. As Adamo, he was the lovable trickster. As Garland Lynch, he was pure nightmare fuel. As Baron von Steppe, he was a master of slapstick villainy. His ability to jump between comedy and horror was rare. He credited his multilingual upbringing and legal training for giving him an analytical approach to acting. His skills went far beyond performance. He had been creating characters long before that, going back to his early days in Mr. Lucky. Blake, Edwards once said, "Ross could make you laugh, then terrify you, sometimes in the same scene." That was his magic. He could be anyone, at any time. A gift that made him one of Hollywood's most unique talents. Ross Martin changed what it meant to be a sidekick on television. As Artemus Gordon in The Wild Wild West from 1965 to 1969, he wasn't just a backup for James West. He was a genius with gadgets, a master of espionage, and one of the best disguise artists TV had ever seen. His transformations were so convincing that even his co-star, Robert Conrad, often didn't recognize him until the cameras were rolling. Ross designed more than 90% of his own disguises. In his dressing room, he would build his looks from scratch, using wigs, prosthetics, and detailed costumes. The crew never knew what to expect. In Night of the Vicious Valentine, 1967, he played a hunched-over gravedigger with rotting teeth and a latex hump. He looked so different that some crew members mistook him for a background actor. His talent for disguise went far beyond makeup. He completely changed his voice, movements, and mannerisms for each role. Fluent in 8 languages, Polish, Yiddish, Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, German, and English, he could switch accents effortlessly. In Night of the Raven, 1966, he became a flamboyant French magician, adding a waxed mustache and an exaggerated Parisian lilt. The show's makeup artist, Ken Chase, later admitted that Ross was more skilled at transformations than most Hollywood effects teams. Ross would sketch disguise ideas on napkins during lunch and then bring them to life himself. The role also pushed him physically. In Night of the Returning Dead, 1968, he played a disfigured arsonist and had to wear full-body burn makeup for 12 hours. The latex caused severe skin irritation, but he refused to stop filming. His dedication reminded many of Lon Chaney Sr., the silent film legend known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. One of his most surprising skills appeared in Night of the Casual Killer, 1967. During a tense undercover scene, he played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major on the violin. It wasn't just an act. Ross had studied at Juilliard in the 1940s and was a concert-trained violinist. The scene was filmed in one take, with Ross playing live on set. The crew gave him a standing ovation. Even the grips were in tears. His musical background wasn't just a fun detail. It became part of Artemus Gordon's spycraft. In Night of The Fugitives, 1966, he hid a Morse code transmitter inside a harmonica, tapping out messages to James West during a prison break. Off-screen, Ross used his violin as a way to relax after intense stunt sequences. He would play Bach during breaks to calm his nerves. Ironically, his classical training almost cost him the role. During auditions, producers thought he was too refined for a Western. To prove them wrong, he improvised a scene where Gordon used a fiddle to distract a saloon full of outlaws. It won him the part. Then, in 1968, disaster struck. On August 17th, while filming Night of the Avaricious Actuary, Ross collapsed from a near-fatal heart attack. Doctors found a 95% blockage in his left coronary artery. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and the show was left without its co-star. Despite everything, his performance never suffered. In 1969, he was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor, an impressive feat for a show often dismissed as campy. But just as he earned recognition, The Wild Wild West was abruptly canceled. On March 12, 1969, CBS pulled the plug despite strong ratings. The show ranked number 12 in the Nielsen charts, but political pressure forced the network's hand. After the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, Congress started cracking down on TV violence. The Wild Wild West became an easy target, even though CBS kept airing the equally violent detective show Mannix. Ross Martin was on top of his career when everything changed. In 1968, during the 4th season of The Wild Wild West, he suffered a near-fatal heart attack. He recovered and returned to finish the series, but Hollywood no longer saw him the same way. Industry insurers labeled him high risk, and major networks backed away. CBS canceled the show in 1969 due to rising concerns about TV violence, and after that, Ross struggled to find leading roles. In 1970, he was offered the lead in Banyan, a detective series that could have revived his career. But after reviewing his medical records, the producers changed their minds. They went with Robert Forster instead, a younger actor without health concerns. Ross's agent, Harry Gold, later revealed in a 1975 TV Guide interview that studio executives were direct about their decision. They told him, "We can't gamble on a star who might drop dead mid-season." Even guest roles came with challenges. When Ross played art critic Dale Kingston in Columbo, Suitable for Framing, 1971, producers demanded Ross had to secure a $250,000 insurance bond in case his health caused filming delays. The studio wouldn't cover it, so Ross paid the cost himself. He earned an Emmy nomination for the role, but his income had dropped drastically. At his peak on The Wild Wild West, he earned $115,000 per episode. By 1973, he was earning just $3,000 for a single guest appearance. His troubles didn't stop with live-action roles. In 1972, Hanna-Barbera cast him as Dr. Paul Williams in CB 2020. After just 2 episodes, the studio's insurers intervened, and Ross was replaced. He later joked, "I'm the only actor fired for having a heartbeat." Despite these setbacks, Ross never stopped working. Between 1970 and 1981, he booked 87 guest roles. He became the go-to actor for villains, eccentric geniuses, and mysterious masterminds. Hollywood might not have trusted him with a lead role, but his talent was impossible to ignore. He made memorable appearances in Hawaii Five-0, The Man from Psy, UNCLE, and Love, American Style, proving he could still own a scene. His ability to transform into any character had been clear from the start. In 1960, he starred in the Twilight Zone episode The Four of Us Are Dying, playing a con artist who could change his face at will. Director John Brahm later admitted that Ross improvised 4 distinct accents for the role, including a Brooklyn gangster and a Southern gentleman. None of it was in the script. One of his most unforgettable performances came in Columbo, Suitable for Framing, 1971. He played Dale Kingston, a smug art critic who murders his uncle and frames his aunt. Ross studied real-life art forger Elmire DeHory to perfect the character. He was so convincing that during filming, Peter Falk, playing Columbo, broke character and muttered, "I hate this guy." The episode's climax, where Kingston is caught by fingerprint-covered art books, pulled in a 27.3 Nielsen rating. It became the highest-rated Columbo episode of Season 1. Not all his roles were serious. Ross had a gift for comedy, too. In the Man from UNCLE episode The Sort of Do-It-Yourself Dreadful Affair, 1966, he played Professor Patrick Hudson, an inventor who creates a machine that turns water into explosives. The role required him to deliver a lot of technical jargon. Instead of memorizing lines, he ad-libbed most of it, using physics terms from his old law school textbooks. Director Joseph Sargent later said, "Ross sounded like he'd built a nuclear reactor in his garage." Ross Martin's life off-screen had as much drama as his roles on television. His journey through love and loss shaped the man behind the characters, and every relationship left a mark on him. He married Muriel Weiss on June 17, 1941, in a small ceremony in New York City. At the time, he was studying law at George Washington University while performing in comedy clubs at night. Their daughter, Phyllis Rosenblatt, was born in 1943 and later became a well-known artist in New York. Ross's career was just beginning, and as he took on radio jobs and Broadway rehearsals, the strain on their marriage grew. By the late 1950s, they had separated but never divorced. Even after they parted ways, Ross remained devoted to Muriel. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1962, he quietly paid for her treatment. The disease was relentless. On March 15, 1965, while Ross was filming the first season of The Wild Wild West, Muriel passed away at 47. CBS executives worried about production delays and refused to give him time off for the funeral. Ross ignored them. He flew to New York overnight, said his final goodbye, and returned to set the next morning without sleep. Years later, he admitted, "I never forgave myself for not being there when she needed me most." The guilt stayed with him, and he later donated $250,000 to cancer research in her honor. For years, few knew about Muriel's passing. It wasn't until 1967, when Ross remarried, that the truth became public. Phyllis, then 24, struggled with her father's decision to move on. "He loved us," she later said, "but Hollywood became his true family." On September 10, 1967, Ross married Olavi Lucille Parsons in a private ceremony in Beverly Hills. She was a former model and documentary filmmaker with 2 children from a previous marriage, Rebecca, born in 1955, and George, born in 1957. Ross legally adopted them, going as far as changing their birth certificates to list him as their father. Some found this decision unusual, but for Ross, it was a way to make their bond official. Rebecca later said, "He didn't just give us his name, he gave us his heart." Their marriage faced a major challenge almost immediately. In August 1968, during the 4th season of The Wild Wild West, Ross suffered a near-fatal heart attack. Olavi became his full-time caregiver. She made sure he took his medication, smuggled oxygen tanks onto set, and even negotiated with CBS to reduce his workload. She agreed to a 30% pay cut just to keep him employed. The stress of it all took a heavy toll. In 1969, she suffered a miscarriage, a loss Ross never spoke about in public. Through all of this, they remained strong as a family. Ross's adopted son, George, followed him into acting, landing a role in the 1978 TV movie The New Maverick under his father's guidance. Meanwhile, Olavi's influence led Ross to try his hand at directing. Between 1971 and 1973, he directed 2 episodes of Love, American Style, at her urging. They supported each other through every challenge, staying together until the end. Ross Martin almost walked away from the role that made him famous. CBS first offered him the part of Artemus Gordon in The Wild Wild West in 1963, but he turned it down 4 times. He had just finished The Great Race and didn't want the grind of weekly television. More than that, he was afraid of being typecast. Ross had trained at Juilliard, spoke 8 languages, and saw TV as a creative trap. He wanted roles that challenged him, not just something that paid the bills. CBS refused to give up. They wanted him so badly that they made an offer no actor could ignore, $5,000 per episode, twice what Robert Conrad was making, creative control over his disguises, and even delayed the pilot for 6 months while they tried to change his mind. When he finally agreed, he had one last demand. Artemus Gordon would never throw a punch. "He's a con man, not a brawler," Ross insisted. That forced the writers to get creative. Instead of fistfights, Artemus relied on deception, disguises, and gadgets like the sleeping gas cigar in Night of the Inferno, 1965. It was a risk, but it worked. The Wild Wild West premiered on September 17, 1965, and within weeks, Ross was getting 3 times as much fan mail as Conrad. But even years later, he couldn't believe how close he had come to throwing it all away. "I nearly sabotaged my own career," he admitted in 1978. "Thank God Blake Edwards called me a fool and changed my mind." Ross's best work should have been in movies, but one role nearly killed that dream. In 1962, Blake Edwards cast him as the asthmatic killer Red Lynch in Experiment in Terror. It was a terrifying performance, but Columbia Pictures kept his name out of the trailers and posters. They were afraid audiences wouldn't accept the Mr. Lucky Star as a murderer. It was supposed to make the film more suspenseful, but it backfired. Critics raved about Lynch's eerie presence, but audiences were confused. Ross's voice was heard in 70% of the film, yet his name was nowhere to be found. Worse, when he auditioned for other dramatic roles, casting directors dismissed him as a comedy actor. It even cost him a part in The Manchurian Candidate, which went to Lawrence Harvey. The film later became a cult classic, but the damage had been done. By 1965, Ross's film offers had dried up, and the actor who once avoided television had no choice but to return to it. For all his talent, Ross's greatest fight wasn't in Hollywood. It was with his own heart. On July 3, 1981, he collapsed on a tennis court at the San Vicente Tennis Ranch in Ramona, California. It was a cruel ending. He had taken up the sport to prove his strength after surviving a near-fatal heart attack in 1968. He had undergone quadruple bypass surgery in 1975 and followed a strict regimen of exercise and medication. None of it was enough. Eyewitnesses said he felt dizzy in the middle of a game, staggered toward the clubhouse, then collapsed just a few feet from the entrance. Paramedics arrived in 8 minutes, but his heart had flatlined. Firefighter Art Bale later recalled, "His wife Olavi was screaming, 'Don't let him die!' They shocked him twice, but it was no use." By the time they reached Pomerado Hospital in Poway, he was gone. The official time of death was 3:17 p.m. The cause? A complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, often called the Widowmaker. His doctor later admitted, "We cleared him for light exercise, but his determination outpaced his physiology." Olavi had been just 20 feet away when he collapsed. She had been his rock since 1967, helping him through his first heart attack and even sneaking oxygen tanks onto Wild Wild West sets to keep him going. In the ambulance, she recited the Lord's Prayer between chest compressions. When they reached the hospital, she refused to leave his side for 6 hours, insisting, "He's just resting." Later, she sued the San Vicente Tennis Ranch for $1.2 million, claiming the emergency response was too slow. The case was settled out of court. Ross had once filmed a nearly identical scene in Night of the Janus, 1968, where Artemus Gordon faked a heart attack to fool the bad guys. Olavi later said, "The memory haunted me. Life imitated art in the worst way." His funeral was held on July 7, 1981, at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in Los Angeles. More than 300 mourners attended, but there were no speeches, no grand eulogies, just a rabbi reciting Kaddish. Robert Conrad was there, shaken. Blake Edwards later said, "Ross deserved a send-off as grand as The Great Race, but that wasn't his style." Hollywood barely reacted. Only Variety and The Hollywood Reporter ran proper obituaries. CBS, the network that once paid him more than its lead star, sent no representatives. Conrad was furious. They canceled his show for being too violent, then ignored the man who made it art. Even his death certificate added insult to injury. It listed his occupation as actor retired, even though he had filmed a Love Boat episode just 3 months earlier. But fans never forgot. Every year on his birthday, they still visit his grave at Mount Sinai, leaving tiny violins as a tribute to his most famous role. Leonard Maltin summed it up best. Ross Martin didn't just die. Hollywood lost a piece of its soul that day. And there you have it. The untold story of Ross Martin, a man whose life was as dramatic and twisting as the roles he played. If you've made it this far, you know why his story matters. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the lives of Hollywood's most fascinating figures. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, the truth is always worth uncovering.